the most important statistic in economics, in my judgment, over the last 40 years is the change in the distribution of income and wealth in the United States. The change. It was always unequal, this country. This country has been unequal from the beginning. Let's remember, we began as a nation that had a large percentage of its people slaves of other people in the society. And that's going to give you betcha, a big difference in standard of living. And we all know that story, except those of us now who need to pretend that this didn't happen. But they just have to take a walk in a few miles in any one direction, and you will see very quickly in America the same inequality that we've always had. But the change of the last 40 years has been remarkable. And the way I describe it is this. If you had taken a look at the distribution of wealth and income in America right after World War II and compared it to the European countries, you would have seen that the United States could, and at that time did, boast that it was less unequal than those countries, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, all of that. And that was correct at that time. We don't hear boasting anymore. Why? Because the situation has reversed itself. Today, the United States is a more unequal country than the Europeans are, and by a lot. So that it is a dramatic change in a country which for most of the 20th century, particularly after the Great Depression, because the Great Depression reduced inequality. It really hurt the people at the top. I mean, they were responsible for it. They were the ones who were riding high, but they fell a long way. It reminded me of the old joke, the taller they are, the longer the fall that they take. But after the 1930s, American capitalism celebrated itself in the 40s, in the 50s, even into the 60s, as a land of equality. And it taught its people to believe what you just quoted. If you work hard and you study hard in school and you play by the rules and you stay within the lines that you're supposed to, why goodness, you will be rewarded with a standard of living your grandparents couldn't have dreamed of, etc., etc. All of that has been undone in the last 40 years. Every step of it, every single step. I'm reminded of an email I got yesterday that showed me a new advertisement for something, if I remember the name correctly, pad split. It could have been split pad. Housing is so expensive, you can now, and there's a whole internet world of, you buy a room for a night. I mean, literally a room, not a hotel room, a room, typically in somebody's house, where you are allowed after 4 in the afternoon to bring in a suitcase and put your clothing on the bed in a room that is slightly larger than the bed, and you can sleep in that bed, and then the next morning you leave. And that's affordable for people who can't afford a motel. And as many of you know, we have pretty cheap motel chains all over the United States, which used to be where those people would have to go. I mean, you're reducing the cost. Now we're going to be living in large groups who occupy a house that once had 4 rooms, has now been reconfigured to have 10 rooms, and provides a living for somebody who can't live off Social Security but can provide a bed a night. And all you're left to do is wonder when the sheets are changed, or in a more difficult situation, if the sheets are changed from one person to another. So I'm wondering, what is the effect, political, ideological, and so on, of a society which, in a short amount of time, is put through a change like that. Normally, that kind of a switcheroo would take a century or two to play itself out. But we have it condensed here, so it is more of a trauma, more of a shock, more of something that shows up in a statistic of the sort you started us with today. And the second thing that comes to my mind is something I've learned after 50 years of being a professor in American colleges and universities, half a dozen where I have taught. And here's what I learned. Most Americans, when confronted with the economic difficulties that they face, blame themselves as individuals for whatever the outcome is. If you're poor, it's your fault. If you're not poor, it's your fault too. You've done it. Elon Musk imagines that he is the person who produced the electric car. Anyone with even this much knowledge of the economic history of the modern automobile knows that all Mr. Tesla did was use a vast array of science accumulated in the centuries before he was born in order to add something. I don't want to take away if he added something, but that's all he did. He added something. He didn't do it. If we could, we ought to pay all the people who did their little parts and who are dead or long forgotten, because they have as much of a role to play as he. But we don't work that way in America. We over-reward the one who sits at the top, and we heap blame and criticism on those at the bottom. I think the statistic is beginning to suggest to the American people, and I sure hope so, that they finally break out of the personally destructive notion that they blame themselves. If you have a bad job, it's probably because you lived in a neighborhood that didn't help you, that you went to a school that was far less than what it could have been, what it should have been, and what it is for others. Maybe a public school rather than a private school. Maybe a school in a comfortable middle-class neighborhood rather than in an urban slum. On and on and on. Maybe you happen to be born to people who kept books in the house. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you were born, in other words, to learn that you are the product of the society you live in much more than you are its creator. You have an influence. You make a difference. You certainly can if you want to. But that doesn't mean you aren't the product of the society. What else could you be? Born into the world as a little baby who's immediately dependent on everybody else. If mother and father and your environment don't feed you, you die. To me, as blunt as possible. So our interdependence with others is obvious, or should be, from the beginning. But we live in a capitalism that has ideologically protected itself. If things go bad, if we don't have a good job for you, it's your fault. If we don't allow you to rise in that job with the experience you accumulate, well, then that's your fault. On and on. Maybe, as you put it, and you're wise about that, Brian, really, maybe it'll teach people or help people grasp the idea that the object of our criticism ought to be the 90% of us that is shaped by the environment in which we live and try to work. And that if we change that environment, it would go a long way towards making us able to live a better and different life and to make more of a contribution back into the society that gave us a chance to do that. We had a corporation, in particular, named Tesla, the company that makes electric vehicles, basically cars and trucks, and is associated with the name of its CEO, Elon Musk. Okay? The board of directors of that corporation offered Elon Musk, one of them of themselves, offered him a salary package over the next 10 years equal to $1 trillion. Now, to give you an idea of what that means, $1 trillion is more than the entire annual budget of the Department of Defense, now renamed War. We spend more on defense than the next 8 or 9 countries in the world combined, and that list of 8 or 9 includes China and Russia. So we are off the chart in spending on defense. We are widely recognized as armed to the teeth. We are providing the bulk of the weapons Ukraine is using. We are providing the bulk of the weapons Israel is using, and so forth. So there's a company that wants to give an individual $1 trillion, more than they now spend on the defense budget, a war budget this year, this calendar year, fiscal year. And to whom? To the person who is already the richest person on this planet, who said by Wall Street Journal and others to be worth somewhere between, they vary, somewhere between $300 and $450 billion he already has. We live in a system that literally makes the richest richer and everybody else having to look for a room because they can't afford a hotel. If we rearrange the money, if we didn't give Elon Musk $1 trillion, but used it instead to help the American people, we could make dramatic changes in the way the government did with those checks during the pandemic, or in a million other ways that could be found to help people. Mr. Musk would still be the richest person on earth, but we would have taken the $1 trillion and helped millions and millions of people around the world. What possible ethics, what possible religious morality, or any other kind of morality could ever justify this? This is beyond even the ancient pharaohs, or as you rightly put it, the kings and queens. They must be rolling over with jealousy in their tombs compared to what they were able to do. And we tolerate this. The family that can't put enough food on the table, the family that has to take in boarders and relatives and friends because they can't maintain the rent or the housing costs, the young people who have to abort their own educations because there isn't the money to pay for it, and going into more and more debt is terrifying. We submit the majority of our people to these indignities, to these sufferings. And why? So that the richest people on the earth, disproportionately American, can become richer still. It is obscene. And you know, I think history teaches us, if we don't deal with it when we can see it and when we can understand it, we pretend we don't have to. When it finally blows up, it's very ugly. Very ugly. But that ugliness isn't because of what happens at the end when it explodes. That ugliness is there no matter how hard we pretend not to see it.